All right, hey everyone, brand new series as we jump into the book of Malachi. And amazing passage where the people of God are really half hearted. The nation's a bit of a wreck, they're under Persian oppression. They're not generous, they're not worshiping, they're not really delighting in the Lord. And what's really sad is they're at the place where they think it's because God has failed. And so, of all the places to start, because this is where it's like fascinating to look at God's heart. Of all the places to start with the nation, he doesn't come in with rebuke, but he starts with some connection. And he says, I've loved you. And instantly they're like, well, how have you loved us? You just see like an entitled kid, like, you don't love me. And he starts way back at the beginning. He says, Jacob I've loved, but Esau I hated. Now, that I believe is about priority, meaning I've loved Jacob to the place where what I had for Esau seemed like hatred. And we talked about in the sermon, there's different camps in the Christian faith that try to figure that text out. That is the verse that Paul uses in Romans 9 to talk about the issue of election. The truth is, at our church, we realize different Christians can land in different spots on that, and we don't divide the church over that. So don't divide your group over that. And so the bigger issue is God telling them, hey, before we start dealing with everything that's wrong, let's get back to square one. I've loved you. I've loved you since Jacob. I've chosen to love you. Throughout the nation's history, the issue is not God's faithfulness, it's their faithfulness. The issue is not God's love, it's their love. And it's interesting to step back and think about our own hearts when we lose that perspective, what tends to show up in our lives. I think a couple things. I think when we've lost the idea of the reality that God's the one who's loved us and chosen us, and we stop living from that place, we start to spend a lot of time looking at our circumstances and basing kind of God's kindness towards us based upon what we're going through right now. I think it's really clear we don't often understand the circumstances of our life and how God's using them for His glory. And I think when the circumstances of our life get bigger than the cross in our life, we're in a bad spot. I think what else happens is I think of the parable of the laborers, where some get hired early, some get hired midday, some get hired at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, the boss pays them all the same, right? Jesus gives us all heaven. And the truth is, had he given them their wages privately, none of them would have had an issue, right? They would have been like, hey, that's a great payment. But when they look at one another and what one another got, they start comparing to God's grace on one person versus God's grace on another. And then they get complaining and grumbling. And one of the signs I think we've really kind of drifted from the reality that God's loved us is we start living our lives complaining about what we get, comparing to what others get. And so the circumstances come too big, the comparison becomes too big. The other thing I start to think that happens in us, and this is the third thing, that when we lose God's love for us, is our critiques start outpacing our rejoicing, right? And so if we just track our last week or last year, is our worship and rejoicing and thanksgiving to God, is that beginning to be outpaced by our criticisms and complaints? And the truth is, man, the reality of the gospel, and this is kind of what God's bringing forward, it's like, dude, I've chosen to love you. I've endured with you. You guys are the one who got you to exile, not me. I kept warning you of it. You guys are the one who ends up in these awful relationships, not me. I keep warning you from it. And yes, it's a mess. But the only reason you're not completely wiped out is because I'm the one who keeps showing up. And it's amazing the illustration of Jacob, because Jacob never does anything right, and yet God chooses him, pins him to the ground, and says, "You're mine," and he surrenders. And for us as Christians, the truth is, at some point, God grabbed us and He pinned us to the ground, and He says, "I've chosen to love you." And man, my hope is just like God wants to do a little heart work with the people in Malachi's day, He do a little heart work with us and go, "Man, I've chosen to love you. My Son has died for you." Um, when was the last time you just spent some time in thanksgiving about that, and let it reorient your current circumstances, let it reorient your current critique to just go, I'm eternally loved and saved and blessed by God. And so, hope you guys have a good discussion about that. It'd be interesting to share where your hearts are at a little bit, and maybe and just a challenge for each other. How could you be more mindful of God's love for you this week?